Hi, everyone. So we're going to get started at 1:05 when everybody just comes in. And yeah, see you guys soon. Okay, so it is now 1:05 and we're going to get started. So good afternoon. Welcome to the final session of our second annual Ruby Jones Conference on Race, Social Justice, and Civic Leadership. The Ruby Jones Conference is brought to you by sponsorship from State Farm Insurance, along with Westchester's Dowdy Multicultural Center, the Center for Women and Gender Equity, the Office of Student Leadership and Involvement, and the Center for Civic Engagement and Social Impact. I am Tyler Hamler, a senior public health major, a member of the conference committee, and a peer educator at the Center for Women and Gender Equity. This year, the Ruby Jones Conference Committee decided to frame our time together by focusing each day on one pillar of the conference's name. Today's focus is on civic leadership, translating our knowledge into meaningful action. I am honored to introduce the final speaker for our conference, Jael Kerandi, a University of Minnesota Student Association ranking representative to the Board of Regents, a former student body president at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Jael is a senior at the University of Minnesota, majoring in finance and marketing with minors in leadership and business law. Jael was the first Black undergraduate student body president at the University of Minnesota. She currently serves as the ranking representative to the Board of Regents. Jael is passionate about racial justice and ensuring that our institutions are being held accountable. Jael chose to call for her university to sever ties with the Minneapolis Police Department after the murder of George Floyd, happening less than 20 minutes from the Twin Cities campus. So a few technical notes before we get started. This is a Zoom webinar, so any questions you have for Jael, please include them in the option on the bottom of your window that says Q&A. You can also submit them anonymously. There will be some time for Jael to respond to your questions at the end of the session. If you're seeking extra credit for class, a link and a QR code will be shared at the end of the session for you to fill out the form to receive extra credit. Today, Jael Kerandi will engage students on the importance of student leaders as advocates for anti-racist practices and the elimination of anti-Blackness at institutions of higher education. She will touch on the relationships with administration, the student body, and the external community. We will center today's conversation around the need to ask our higher education institutions to align their actions with the diversity statements on their website. I hope that we are all inspired to do the same here at Westchester University and in our communities. Please join me in welcoming Jael Kerandi to the conference.
Would y'all help me in sharing my video? I'm having a little trouble on the side. Perfect. Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here. Thank you to Westchester and all of your affiliates, as well as State Farm for allowing me to have this opportunity to speak to you all. It is truly my pleasure, and I hope we can all get something out of this conversation. So let's get to it. I named this conversation No Middle Ground because I think we have always been at a point at which the administration or different institutions are willing to kind of look for places of compromise or look for an opportunity for us to come to a point at which we meet in the middle. But there is no middle when it comes to our lives, right? There is no middle when we're talking about the practices that our institutions have that are adversely affecting our Black students. So before we get into that, I just want us to take a look back. And I want us to look back at all of the different advocacy that has happened at our institutions before us and how long this has really been going on. So back in 1923, students at Florida A&M staged a 3-month protest, including boycotting classes, firebombing a building, to demand the resignation of the institution's president who accommodated segregation policies. That was almost a century ago. And when you look at our institutions now, we are still having to get engaged and having to do all this different advocacy on the same things that are going on. Now, people talk about racism and they talk about what's been going on and how we've gotten better. And I often say racism didn't go away, right? It changed forms. We see that in the policies that are given for students of color, how students are able to be admitted into the university, how much they get to engage, what types of schools that recruiters from universities go out to talk to students in. This is still going on. Now, this is offering Lucy Foster, and her story is extremely inspiring because for her, in 1952, the University of Alabama admitted her and Polly Ann Myers, 2 Black graduate students, before learning of their race. Thurgood Marshall and others joined the fight to desegregate the University of Alabama after admissions officials refused to let them enroll in class. So these 2 women were enrolled and were admitted to the university on their own merit, and the university rescinded that entrance and actually refused them to enroll in classes. Now, 4 years later, in 1956, Lucy ends up enrolling at University of Alabama and is attacked by a white mob on her 3rd day on campus, and officials promptly expelled her for what they say was her own protection. Now, the first time I read that, I said, I don't know if I read that right. They ended up expelling her instead of expelling the students that attacked her for her own protection. It doesn't end. In 1963, now this was not necessarily a university, but was very key. In Birmingham, Alabama, through word of mouth and under the veil of secrecy, over 4,000 Black students organized to desert classrooms exactly at 11 a.m. on what they call D-Day, off of all the mass demonstrations that were going on, and police tried to stop them, yet the children prevailed. They were thrown into detention centers, they were hosed down by the fire, the different things on the road, and they had one of the most notorious police chiefs at that time. And the students still kept marching. I mean, we're talking young students, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, marching for their rights at this young age. And this is back in 1963. Now, in 1968, police officers opened fire on a peaceful civil protest at South Carolina State University in what later was known as the Orangeburg Massacre. Nearly 30 demonstrators are wounded, and a freshman and 2 high school students and 18-year-old protester ended up dead. after police came and opened a fire. Now, if you saw any demonstrations that happened this summer, our police were very freely letting out tear gas and trying to some of these crowds, even when it wasn't necessary. They were so quick to do so. Everything was an immediate reaction to everything that was going on. It didn't matter in what way the demonstration was done. The police were there trying to do something else, trying to provoke action, trying to put people onto the sides and be on the defense, when people are usually just there merely exercising their own rights that they have. Now, what does this tell us? What does this include? What does this, to me, what conclusion does this draw? And this tells me that education is no exception to what is going on. Our universities are within our cities. They're within our states. They don't get to sit in a silo and give us blanketed statements about what is going on in our world and society, but sit there and get to invoke the same practices, right? Our universities don't get to sit there and say, well, we value diversity and inclusion, but if you look at the graduation rates that they're not supporting, our Black students are not doing as well. It's not a matter of the education gap, it's what's going on with our support gap. What is going on with what our institutions are doing to make sure our students are receiving the support they need in all facets, not just in the classroom, but mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically, whether it's housing, whether it is making sure they're not food insecure. What is our universities doing there? But the practices that we see are so contrary to the policies that they put on their website. All we continuously see are these blanketed statements or these very general statements about the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But then when we look to how they treat Black students or how Black students feel with the police on campus, we're not hearing much, right? We're hearing that public safety, or we're hearing that we're in an urban city. Well, Black students are saying that the very people that are supposed to protect them are the very people that they need protection from. When does our university listen to our voice? Which leads me to say, we are students and we have a voice and we must be heard. We can no longer sit here and allow our institutions to have these forethoughts, to be so willing to go forth and make these actions without us saying something. The only person that we have a responsibility to is ourselves. We are the ones that are putting into this institution, that are sitting in these classrooms, and one day will be alumni of these institutions that will then come back and look to give. But how can we do that if they're not listening? So why must we do this? We must do this because we pay tuition at this institution and we must look for our return on service. It is no longer okay for our administrators to sit in their high seats, deal with politics in regards to hierarchy and respectability politics, and leave us here to suffer. People don't talk about what goes on in the classroom and what students have to experience on a day-to-day basis. They don't talk about what goes on in regards to students feeling as if they don't have a place in the classroom, or the professors that ask questions like, aren't you glad to be here? As if my white peer who sits next to me is deserving of and I'm supposed to be grateful for. When does our institution recognize the merits of our Black students? When do they realize that the barriers that we have to overcome to get here are far greater than our peers? When is the respect given? When do our universities say, we are looking into the state and looking how we can better recruit Black students, not for diversity numbers, but because they deserve to be here the same way? Because it's not their fault that redlining is what pushed them out to further cities. And then when redlining happened and the way taxes were allocated, our schools weren't funded in those areas. And our schools weren't funded in those areas. Therefore, programs like ACT and SAT prep weren't available to those students. Therefore, not giving them the same opportunity or an equitable opportunity to study and be able to move forward into the application process. When does our institutions start to have those questions? And that's our job as student leaders and activists. We have to go in and demand this of our institutions. Make sure that they listen and they hear what we're saying so that they know that the responsibility at the end of the day that I have as a student leader is to my fellow students, but not only to myself who I sit here today, but to the students that are going to come to this institution one day, the institutions that are going to come, the students, excuse me, that are going to come here one day, to the young Black girls and the young Black men who are in elementary school right now and are thinking of one day coming to an institution, but aren't even yet recognizing all the barriers that are put before them. How do we chart to change that narrative? Our proximity to campus in these 4 to 5, 6 years that we're here is so important. So institutions know that it's not just going to be a thing where you can talk to me and then after I graduate, it's over with. We have to keep it going. So how are we able to do this? If we organize in all its forms. Organization isn't just in relation to just sitting there and making sure that we have a protest. Organization can be putting together a petition. Organization can be getting a group together and working closely with them to make sure that we can understand the policies that need to be effective. Organization can mean you talking to your professors who you know are allies, who you know can do this work, and you know that are willing to help us in all that we do. Organization can look a plethora of ways, but it's important that we organize. It's important that we come together. We are a village, we are a community. Bringing together what we can do and in an effort to really change our universities for the better is so important. The work that so many have done before us year over year over year is why we have programs like the African American minor or the African American major. It's why we have programs that allow us to have conversations like this. It's the reason that we have programs that give us the opportunity to get scholarships and do these different things. And while we're grateful, that is still not enough from our institutions. We are paying the same tuition that our peers are paying. Right? We're sitting in the same classrooms, listening to the same professors hurl microaggressions and overt racism at us day after day. So how do we do this? We come together, we gather, and we make sure that our demands are heard. And yes, I mean demands. We've gone past the point of where we're suggesting or we're encouraging or it's a requested ask. We must demand these things out of our institution. We've been sitting here year over year, attending these institutions, paying this money, and sitting as alumni when our institutions have not been respecting our places here. When we talk about the conversation on policing, it always turns to one of campus safety. Why can't we talk about policing? Tell me what you mean. When we want to talk about what's going on in our classrooms with overt racism, then you want to turn it to tenure, and maybe somebody didn't mean it that way. We can no longer sit by idly as these things go on. And we cannot take no for an answer. Yes, we're not going to get the answer we want every single time we go into that room, but we must not stop. We must be continuous and effortless in our ask. We must come together and join and band together. And if one person can help you at one school or another school, let us help each other so we can make this happen. And lastly, when does this happen? And this has to happen right now. I mean, the conversation on policing or the conversation of the intersections of policing and education institutions has been long going on. This is not something new. This is not my work that I started. This is not another that just started this summer. This work has been going on for years. And so it's our duty to make sure that we are continuously to say no more. We've been fed up. Right? It should have happened yesterday. We've already said this over and over and over, which is why we are now in the place of demands. There was a time for conversation. There was a time for meeting in the middle. That time has gone and long since passed. We must be executing our ask and our demand to them and saying, this is exactly what we need. And or else, what are we willing to give up? What are we willing to say we won't do if they don't meet our demands? When we talk about the protests that happened before, they weren't going to class. They refused. Talking about a lock-in, people were sitting inside a building for days waiting. At my university, we had a Moore Hall takeover where we took over our administration building years ago and stayed in there until they met our demands. We must just say, what are we willing to sacrifice for this ask, for this demand that we sit in front of? And that is what is going to be key. We're willing to sacrifice and make sure that we are making our institutions a better take because we have the opportunity. As students, you're not paying, the institution isn't paying you. Your fiduciary duty is truly to yourself and what you wish to see and what you would like to see. I want to let y'all know we can do this. The reason that we see what's been going on in regards to all the different programs we had at our institution, at one time they weren't there. If you look at your own universities and some of the programs that have been afforded to you or the scholarships or the work that people have done, at one point they weren't there. At one point somebody took a risk. At one point somebody said, I'm going to lead this and I'm going to make this happen. And today we get to benefit from that. I urge us to do the same thing. I urge us to create our institutions in a way that we can say in 10 years, in 20 years, somebody else is going to be sitting there and they're going to have something better than I had. They're going to have something that gives them the opportunity for a better chance. They're going to have something that defies the barriers that it took to get them there. They're going to have something that negates all of the different things that people place on them and the different notions and narratives and perspectives people assume about us and negates all of that and gives us an opportunity at an equitable chance. I want people to understand that they get to have that chance, that they're not just starting from the back, and they get to have the opportunity to really do what they would like to do at our institutions. Angela Davis said, "I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept." And that to me speaks volumes. We don't have to sit here, and if we sit here and we focus on everything that we cannot change, we will never sit there and think creatively about what we can do. But when we sit here and say, what is going on that I can no longer accept? What is going on that I see in the news? What is going on that we see everywhere that says, I cannot accept this? And when we reach the point where we cannot accept, all we can do is but to evoke change. All we can do is but sit there and say, what can we do next? How can we make different changes happen? And this really spoke to me, because I think sometimes you sit there and you wonder, what place do I have in this? How can I do something different? And as students, we do have that opportunity to make that change. It is up to us, in fact. It is up to us to advocate and say something. Yes, you could be a student leader, but that's not a requirement. Your voice should be important regardless. And when you band together with other students and you start to bring up the voice of thousands, you're bringing to the table something they could never bring before. You bring to the table the perspective of their very most important stakeholder. There is no university without students. And sometimes we fail to realize that, but there truly is no university without students. If students stopped paying tuition today, our universities would be under. Even before the COVID pandemic, even before this, if our students stopped paying tuition and we said we are not going to attend class or attend your institution unless you're willing to do this, it wouldn't happen. They would listen to us. We can't sit around. This is everything that has been going on. If our institutions are willing to be idle, if our institutions are willing to accept this and not willing to make change, we don't have to accept that. We aren't sitting here and we're yes men. It's not about sitting down and shutting up, but it's about standing up and saying something. The only time we should have to be taking the knee is when our fists are up, and that's it. But we shouldn't have to sit here and allow this to continuously happen over and over and over, and they expect us just to be quiet. We can no longer accept this. So at this time, I want everyone to just take about 2 minutes, and I want you to write down what you can't accept and what you are willing to do to change that. So I'm gonna give everybody 2 minutes, and then we'll come back, and hopefully you guys have reflected on this a little bit. And I hope you all took time to really understand that and maybe engage in really thinking about what you aren't willing to accept and what you aren't willing to really see at our universities, but also in our world, in our society. Our universities are not an exception to what's going on, but they're surely not detached from the cities in which they operate in. Our legislators look to them, our community looks to them, our state looks to them. So I really hope you took some time to engage in that. Now, I want to go into a little bit about my story and really why student activism has always been so important to me. So I originally was born in Nairobi, Kenya, and I moved here when I was 18 months old. And in doing so, I was very much, I was really young, but my parents were also very afraid of what would happen in America. They'd never experienced it before. But in relation to that, racism looked very different to them, right? It was something they hadn't come in contact with into their adult livelihood until they came here. And being a young girl, teaching me that or understanding those different practices was more difficult for them. When we moved here, my parents can remember that the treatment that they received was so shocking to them, but they never even knew how to cover it up from us. The way people talked to us, the way people assumed about our intellect or what we understood or knew. And I can remember going into elementary school, I would be so confused at why people treated me the way that they did. I was a really engaging student before. I was very social until I got to elementary school, and people were so rude and so mean. And I went to a predominantly white elementary school and always felt that. People were really rude or said different things, and I was always bullied throughout that whole time. But there was one girl that I really connected with, and her name was Cassie. We were very good friends. We engaged often. And I can remember in the 3rd grade, she came back from after winter break. I mean, we're ready. Everybody's excited. We get back from school. And I remember she came and she told me, and she's like, well, my parents said I can't play with you anymore because you're Black. And I remember sitting there like, but this is different than all the other people that have been mean to me who haven't been my friend. But this was my friend. This was my best friend. And I didn't understand why. And I could never comprehend how she could just so easily detach from me because of my skin color when we had been such good friends before. It had nothing to do with treatment, nothing to do with sharing. It was just the fact that her parents had told her, you can't play with the Black girl in school. And from that moment, I remember feeling so aware of myself and who I was bringing to the world. And I remember talking to my parents about it, and I was extremely upset. And they told me, they can never take away your mind. Right? They can never take away the way that you think. They can never take away your perspective. They can never take away your intellect or how you carry yourself. What they look to take away is because they're inferior to. They feel afraid of it. It causes them to be fearful of what you can do should you understand the capabilities that you have. So learn them now so that you never have to have somebody be able to tell you later because you know it for yourself. And that was so powerful to me as a young girl, even though at that point I didn't fully understand what my father was telling me. But what he was telling me was you stand up by yourself and you stand tall. You stand tall because you know who you are, whose you are, and where you come from. You don't have to have them validate you in that. All they're going to do is try to invalidate you on the work that you've done and who you are as a person. Now, as I was going to finish my elementary school years, I had felt this urge to be a leader. I didn't know why, and I didn't know really where it came from. But I felt this urge to be a leader, and I felt this urge to work with others. And I can remember towards the end of my elementary school years, I was going to be on student council. I was set. My 5th grade year, I was like, this is what I'm gonna do. And I can remember as I started that year, I was ready to go, and this other girl was running against me. And she was a white woman, always really popular, always engaged with others. And somebody said, well, why would we vote for you? If she's in the running, like, why would we vote for you? And again, I was confused because I said, well, my dad told me they can't take away my intellect, my perspective, my mind, and that's what I had. I was 10, but I knew what I was able to offer. I didn't get it, to no one's surprise. And then in 6th grade, I said, you know what, I'm just gonna keep trying. And I said, I'm gonna keep trying. In 7th grade, I didn't get it. And I said, well, I'm gonna keep trying. And then 8th grade, it didn't happen. And I said, clearly something's going on, and I'm assuming I'm this great leader, and it's not the truth. But I still had this willingness to lead. I felt like that it wasn't even just about me, that I had a voice that I could give to my peers, that I had something to say. And I can remember then going into high school, I was determined. I said, I'm going to get there. I'm going to get it done. High school is going to be different. I'm going to be able to do all of this. And my 9th grade year, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go for student council this time. I'm going to get this is for me. And ran for student council, didn't get it. And I said, you know, it was my first year. I don't really know that many people. That's okay. Let me try again next year. All right, so 10th grade year comes around. Tried again, and I didn't get it. And I started to think to myself, what am I so convinced of, or what do I see in myself, or what others see in me that everybody else can't see? Why do I feel so determined to do this? Why is there something in me, a burning spirit to be a leader and to work with others and to be able to empower others that people aren't seeing in me? And I went to my sister and I said, you know, I know you know the student body, or the student council president. Do you think we could ask her if I could just be an ex officio member of the board? I just want to be there. I don't have to have a vote, whatever the case is. I just want to be there. We talked to the president and she said, absolutely. I joined the student council the following weeks and I was engaging. And then following that, at the end of that year, I ran for vice president and I won. At the end of that, I was able to get through all of this and still be able to say, you know what, I'm still ready to be a leader. I still want to be here. And then at the end of that year, I ran and I became president. Once I finished my academic career at my high school institution, I graduated as student council president, the DECA president, the National Honor Society president, and I was working with our board as a student advisory chair. Among many other leadership positions, I was holding a step captain in other places. So throughout that whole time, although person after person after person, whether it was a constituency, whoever it was telling me this is what I was supposed to be, I remained there. I knew what my purpose was. I truly believe that God gave me this gift of engaging and leading others, and I had to use it. There was something in that I had to bring into that room that I knew that I had, a perspective that often wasn't shared and a perspective people often weren't willing to listen to, and I was ready to do so. Now, when I got to college, I was extremely worried about how I would be able to do this because I had just gotten into my stride as a leader. I was worried about what was going to happen and how people were going to receive me, because it wasn't just my small high school anymore. It was a whole institution of over 30,000 students. And I worried about what perspective I would be able to bring, and would they listen to me? If all my life I had struggled to even get in the one room I could finally get into, what would happen now when the door was shut much tighter? And I can remember, after joining for student government for the first time, I started to understand that in fact, when I walked in those rooms, I feared about what I could add, but in fact, I was the asset they were looking for. I was the person that they needed to listen to, and I was the one that I wanted them to hear, that wanted to hear me. And that was so key in understanding that I could come into these rooms and I had the backs of so many that I could stand on, that I'd worked so hard to be here, that I could then stand on their backs and still bring that voice. By the end of my junior year when I ran, by the end of my sophomore year when I ran to be vice president, so many people were frustrated and saying, well, how are we gonna let the Black girl be there? What have we done where's everybody else that wants to run? Why aren't we getting other people into student government? What's going on with our numbers? When I worked at the Board of Regents, it was a story of what's the process? How did she get through it? How did that happen? And I can remember being vice president and people continuously saying and wondering, how did we let her get there? By the end of that academic year, this past spring, I was this first Black student body president after our president resigned. Going into that, people then said, well, we wonder how she's gonna do with the pandemic. Well, I don't really understand if she's gonna be able to do well. This is really hard. She probably is gonna need some help, or she probably won't be able to do it on her own. But I ended up being able to call our university to sever its ties with the Minneapolis Police Department 24 hours following my letter that I wrote. And that's only to show that we can do this. It's not about what people have told us. It's not about what people believe about us, but we truly can do this. And so I just want to show you a small snippet of the letter that I did write to our university, asking them to sever these ties. I told them, we have lost interest in discussion, community conversations, and donut hours. We no longer wish to have a meeting or come to an agreement. There is no middle ground. The police are murdering Black men with no meaningful repercussions. This is not a problem of some other place or some other time. This is happening right here in Minneapolis. We no longer tolerate the ineffective, inconsistent bias training that rarely serves as more than a fig leaf. We have no purview or jurisdiction over the operations of Minneapolis Police Department, except as citizens of Minneapolis. However, as student leaders, we do have a stake in the operations of the University of Minnesota Police Department. Therefore, we clearly and without hesitation demand that the University of Minnesota Police Department ceases any partnerships with the Minneapolis Police Department immediately. This is inclusive of any previous contracts, events, security operations, and any additional relationships that were inclusive of the Minneapolis Police Department, barring any reporting structures. As a land-grant institution, statements professing appreciation of diversity and inclusion are empty and worthless if they're not backed by action. A man was murdered. It is our job as an institution to exert whatever pressure we can to keep our students safe and demand justice in our city and state. We expect to reply to this concern within 24 hours of receipt. With deep loss, disgust, and exhaustion, Jael, Kerandi, a Black woman, the undergraduate student body president. And I read that to you today because those words mean so much to me. They were a statement not only for myself, but the student leaders and the activists all over the nation that have been fighting for equitable policies for so long. We had been at a point where I was wondering, from the work that I had done years prior on policing at our institutions, the asks that I had made, the engagements I had had for race relations, and this letter meant to me that you either were going to say what you needed to say and pick what side you were on. We weren't going to sit there and allow you to be wishy-washy or enforce a task force that ended up doing nothing for us. We weren't willing to sit there and have another event where you talk about diversity and inclusion, but follow that up with no action. I wasn't willing to sit there and allow another statement to be pushed through our PR office showing what the university said about their feelings on the matter if they weren't going to do anything about it. The anti-racist practices needed to be put in place. The anti-Blackness was clear at our universities. They showed it day in and day out. We needed to make a change. And this, to me, why this was inspiring to myself was because of the fact that then the recognition of what was going on was held. We started to see people all over the nation starting to recognize what had happened at the University of Minnesota. And it wasn't just about the fact that my name was on it, the fact that I was able to write the letter, but I know how much went into this from so many other student leaders. But what to me really brought up the inspiring part was what then happened all over. What happened at different institutions all over the nation, where they started to call for this defunding of our police and started to have these conversations on what police were doing to our students of color at our campuses. It was amazing to see how many students were saying, this happened on our campus too. We saw this exact issue, and they now knew that they had the strength and the purpose and the ability to be able to go forth and ask for these changes and demands. Because to me, I really want everyone, after they leave here today, I hope this was helpful, and I hope this has brought a fire under you to go change the things we cannot accept, because all we need to do in our communities and in these different places, we need to go advocate. We need to go speak up. We have a voice, we have the strength, and now is the time we need to do it. And while we do that, we're listening to our community. We're understanding the needs that they have. Of course, we have to remain humble. Of course, we're going to do this work with humble hearts and a willing heart, but we have to fight with pride. We really stand on the backs of so many and our ancestors and the fights that they have to make sure that we were here. While people talk about slavery, slavery never ended, it just changed forms. It's our responsibility to continuously end these anti-racist practices and call out the anti-Blackness in all communities. And we have to do it. For me, it's doing it for somebody else and then doing it for myself. Angela said something so important. She talks about the fact that, you know, this country promises us 3 liberties of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and we're still stuck at life. We're still at life. This is not a matter of, is this policy okay, or is this program okay, or what should we do? We are talking about life here, our mere livelihood, our right to exist. Do not take no for an answer. Do not sit there and allow others to say what and determine what should happen. And while we're doing this, it's okay not to have the right answer. It's okay not to know everything. But that's why we have a community. So ask for help. Don't be afraid to do so. And in that, when you get tired, when you don't know what to do next, pause. But do not become comfortable. Don't become complacent. They're waiting for us to tire. They're waiting to see the exhaustion in us. We're not done. And be willing in there, when you know where you've been, also to then uplift others. Be willing to work with others. Be willing to empower their voice and what they wish to see. Because at the end of the day, you both, you and that person, you all reserve the right to speak up about your own experiences. Don't let anyone write that story for you. You've experienced it. Do not let somebody come in and tell them what they think the Black community needs. Do not let somebody come in and tell you what they believe policing should look like. Ask them who they've talked to. Many a times people have asked me the question on policing, well, what about our white students? I said, well, how many of our white students have asked their Black students how they feel about policing? Because at the end of the day, you are worthy. You're more than worthy to be at these institutions. You have the voice, you have the power, you have the merit, you have the intellect. And if somebody hasn't told you that, then you need to know that today. You're supposed to be at the institution you're supposed to be at, and you should be in that room. And as we continue to fight for this, we must respect the work of those before us. And in doing that, we must continue the work. We must push it forward in all its forms. It truly does take a village. So we must be in our community. We must not forget the work that is happening locally. We must not forget the mutual aid funds that exist. We must not forget to be a part of our community as we do this. And even as we take the risk, lead, even if you don't think anyone is following you, even if you're the only person saying it over and over and over again, we must remain resilient. We will get there. If I didn't believe we get there, we wouldn't be fighting. We're going to get there. But we must lead, and we will continue to lead. And as leaders arise everywhere, we will rename and create this cohort of leaders who are ready to go forth and continue this fight every single day. Because we have to hold the authority accountable. We have to stop putting people in leadership positions that aren't willing to fight for what we need. And yes, it's a need, not a want. It is our livelihood. And as we seek these creative solutions and we ask for these questions of our institutions, we must bring receipts. Every single receipt that we have. And that can be qualitative too. That can be a story, but we're gonna bring them and we're gonna let them know what's been going on. And at the end of the day, at the end of every day that we work through, we must remain relentless in all that we do. We will not stop. We are here to stay until we see our demands met. It's not just about us. It's not about us sitting in this room. It's about the thousands of students that are in school right now that have to deal with the trauma of how the media has depicted our people. It's about the fact that we have to teach our young boys police etiquette because we're afraid of what could happen. It's because we see the stories of Trayvon Martin and Jamar Clark and Philando Castile over and over again. It's because somebody walked into Breonna Taylor's apartment and the same justice system that awarded damages in millions refused to persecute. It's because we have to remain relentless because our lives depend on it. Thank you so much. And now I really appreciate this and we can move into the Q&A portion.
Thank you for those very inspiring words. Some questions that we have from the audience that you kind of not touched on, but we're getting there, was how do you balance your own mental health while continuing to persevere and make change?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think what I said about pausing sometimes and taking a moment to say, how can I, spend time, if it's laughing with my roommates, if it's taking a walk, if it's working out, I try and work out every day. And doing that to really allow me the opportunity to just take a pause and detach. I think every time we open up our phones, it's something else, or we're learning of something else. So really taking a moment to detach. But then, like I said, not getting comfortable. I think it can be, sometimes when I detach, I'm like, I wish I could stay in this space of which you almost can not have to deal with this. But again, it's our livelihood. So it's sitting there and pausing, but then saying, what can I do next? What does it look like? And sometimes to me, that's empowering somebody else. And that to me can be work. I think it's really hard right now to see activism, and people have defined that word for us, but activism to you or making change to you is unique to you. So whatever works for you, you should do that.
And then another question was, when you were organizing at your school, where did you find the most support? Like examples like family, peers, social media?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question. So I knew of some administrators that I knew would be supportive. What was a little different in this specific ask that I made was that I asked for a reply within 24 hours. So from the time I sent it to the time I was waiting for a decision, there wasn't much time to meet with people or really know where people's heads were at. So a lot of the support I got was through social media, because that's where people were able to sign on to the letter and engage and be able to send letters themselves to the administration if they wished. So a lot of it did come from people on social media retweeting the letter, trying to get the letter spread out, and so other people would see it and sign on to it and hopefully encourage the administration to cut the ties.
Right now, I would encourage anyone with questions to use the Q&A, but we have some more questions as well. So what would your advice be to staff and faculty on how to be present and committed to supporting student activism?
Yeah, absolutely. I think really looking at how your university is laid out, and every administration or every university is slightly different, but many of them have their student activities office or their student services office, where a lot of the individuals who are most closest to students are utilized. So I'd really encourage students to go there. In regards to what faculty and staff can do, is create your own cohorts or your own groups together that can also push forward this work and invite students to engage with it. I talk often about, when people talk about, well, what should we see about universities now? And I say, well, it's not just about, do we change policing, but do we change mental health counselors? Do we change what faculty that we put on tenure? Do we change how we reward our research assistantships, or how we give grad students what they need, who are people of color? What do we do to make sure they're supported? And so I always say, faculty and staff, what you can do is also push for these things at the levels that you have. How can you pull in things regarding anti-racism and anti-Blackness into your classrooms? How can you bring the topics that you teach and understand it? People would ask me, I'm a business student, well, how are we supposed to bring this into business? And I say, well, how many times have you talked about Black Wall Street in class? How many times do you talk about these things that have happened to us in all sectors of our society in your classrooms? I promise you I can bring up something that touches it. So taking that responsibility, but then also pushing for these same things to the administration as a faculty or staff.
Another question was, how did you know like who to talk to in your community? So government, like even in general, anything in general.
Yeah, so I think in that regard, I was being in student government, I had the opportunity to kind of see what was going on in different places and know where people were willing to listen. At that time, I had spoken to different individuals in our community in regards to just those who had been organizing previously or had some of that experience, but not that much. And so I think in regards to know who to go to our community, one, social media has given us this age of where we have access to so much information, but people were often tagging different groups or talking to different groups about what should be happening or what should be going on. But even in that, it was really reaching out to the people that I knew that I'd met earlier and saying, this is what I want to do, or this is what I want to see, who should I talk to? So I often tell people, like, once you know me, my network is your network. And I think that is so key in like being willing to engage and connect people, because that's how I've met so many different people who are doing this work and are pushing it forward. But no, it doesn't come intuitively, nor is it just out there for us to use. But I think when you talk to different people and you can name that this is what you want to do, and you are able to see and find somebody at the institution. I know I'm saying find somebody, that's hard, but once you find that one person who knows somebody, they're going to connect you and they're going to make sure you get there.
So this next question is somewhat like what you just answered. It's a question of like, what books or activists have you used to gain understanding and knowledge around these issues?
Yes, absolutely. Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together is one of my favorite books. And because I love education is probably why I gravitated towards that. There's been other articles and other research I've read, but I would say that book really gave me a lot of perspective and allowed me to sit there and say, like, what are we doing? And I think part of it too has been looking at, obviously the work of Angela Davis is so inspiring to all of us, and we all see it around us, and it's so important. But growing up, people were never sitting there and telling me, well, learn about this history, right? No one was saying, well, these are the race relations that are going on, or this is how it's systemically shown, right? What I was told is racism existed, and then everyone would sit there and we'd sit there and praise Abraham Lincoln, and then it would be like, well, that's just about all you need to know. Oh, and then let's talk about, you know, Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King, and Rosa Parks, and I think you're good. I think you got it from here. And unfortunately, I never had somebody that was sitting there and be like, no, Jael, this is exactly what's going on. Nobody sat there and told me, well, we romanticize Martin Luther King to an extent that is crazy, right? They wanted to kill the man and they succeeded. They wanted him for dead. He was on was wanted list. Like, things like that were not taught to me. So when I came to an institution of higher education, I was eager to learn about these things. And it was people at our institution and taking different classes where people were, I took one class where we talked about actually reality television, but we touched on why so many of these things are so present in all parts of our lives. And it was taught by a Black woman, and she went into how this works. So the people to me that I really have gravitated towards have been the people who have been willing to invest and teach me. But truly, that book has honestly done a lot for me, and really given me a lot of motivation on really understanding these issues, especially in education.
Another question that we had was, what are you currently working on?
Yes, this is a great question, and I receive it often. So, like I said, I moved out of the role of student body president. I now work and serve as our ranking representative to the Board of Regents. And for me, one, I've been really working on how I can be more present in my community. And whether that's, it's hard right now because I've wanted to do so many things, but obviously we can't move as we would like. But really engaging, and I love working with young children, and something I was trying to do at my old high school is go and tutor math students, and just engage with them, because I think there's a notion on what people expect out of us, but if somebody can see me as a role model, hopefully then they'll be inspired to do the same. So really engaging in my community. But in terms of working on at my institution, we're currently in review of so I asked for the severing of ties with our Minneapolis Police Department, but we still have campus police that are unique to our university, and we're currently working on a review of them. And I've been listening in and have heard some of the thoughts of the outside consultant, and trying to make sure that whatever is recommended at the day is reflective of what Black students want at our institution. So still continuing that conversation, but also still pushing for things like, are we going to have a class on anti-racism practices? Are we going to have a class that really teaches the history of America and everything that is going on? It's not enough to have a module or or like a training that is encouraged of students. I want something that's required. I want students to graduate from our institution with this knowledge. So pushing for things like that is still ever present as well.
Thank you. And then another question was, what are your future plans, like aspirations, goals?
Yes, this is a wonderful question. Honestly, I truly believe that the position that I was placed in at the time I was placed in was God-given. My mom often tells me, she's like, you know, you're like Queen Esther because you came at such a time like this. And so to me, right now, I wrapped up an internship with Microsoft, but I've always said that my goals and my dreams are going to be where God wants me. And wherever I go, I'm going to be an activist there. Wherever I go, I'm going to be an advocate there. So in terms of future plans, honestly, wherever God leads me and wherever I end up.
We may have time for like one more question.
Okay.
The question was from, how do you think we can best talk about these issues to be able to create a multicultural or a multiracial coalition / movements across campuses in the country?
Absolutely. I think one, you have to, you do need buy-in from the top, because you're going to need resources from implementation. And I think when we look at how institutions work, find your champion, whether that's in the senior leadership office, whether that's a faculty member that can get you to senior, but find your champion and start to gauge where people's minds are. And when you put out that call, I promise you there's people at your institution that feel the same way. But do not let them, in this work, when you build these coalitions and you build these groups, do not let them sit there and have them as coy for them working on diversity and equity issues. Don't let them say, well, we have this task force working on it in some part of the university under some umbrella. Make sure that they know that the implementation, the recommendations that you bring forth should be implemented, and that they're concrete and that they're clear. So they can't sit there and devise whether or not they want to implement them or whether or not what happens, because it's so easy for universities to get into that, and then the issues never get talked about or solved. So while you create these groups, make sure that there's a plan and that the university supports what you're doing. And if they don't, be willing to make the demand towards them and make that call. I promise you there's people out there that want to do this work. There's people who are non-Black that want to do this work, but make sure that the people that are in those rooms understand anti-Blackness and also understand what has been going on systemically. Don't let anybody come in that room and tell you, well, this, that, and the third. Listen to what they're saying from the perspective of understanding that you have the experience. It is your work. It is what you've done. It's what you've gone through over all these years.
Thank you. So I think we're going to wrap up with a message from State Farm. It says, we would like to thank Demetrius Jaggers and the Dowdy Multicultural Leadership for taking the time to offer the Ruby Jones Conference. This was a wonderful program, and these conversations are essential to our development and future. Hope everyone walks away prepared to help yourself, the community, and our society grow and learn from each other. We appreciate everyone for their time and have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Once again, we would like to just thank Jael for that powerful message and words of wisdom and encouragement to everyone. And we want to thank all of those who joined us today and who has joined us over the last 3 days for the second annual Ruby Jones Conference on Race, Social Justice, and Civic Leadership. If you are with us and will require extra credit for attendance, please hang out with us just for a little bit while longer as we prepare to put up the QR code. And also, we would like for you to look out for your a message from your email so that you can give us all feedback about the conference and help us to improve the conference for the future. So at this time, we're going to provide the QR code and the link so that you can get your extra credit. Thank you again, everyone, and please enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend.